Terrific. Welcome back, everybody. First of all, Ben, I'm intrigued about what that background is, so maybe you can share with us that as well when the time is right. But anyway, welcome, everybody. And you may possibly have heard of the National Science Foundation if you are interested in SBIRs and STTRs. They award over $200 million in change in funding to entrepreneurs all across the country. And we are honored to also lay the claim that UC Riverside is an I-Corps site for the National Science Foundation as well, and have been honored to be able to send various teams for national cohorts around the country. Introducing Dr. Ben Schrag is the Senior Program Director for the SBIR and STTR programs. He has been with the NSF for, Ben, I think 11 since 2009, 11 years and change and so forth. And prior to that, he was Director of Research and Development at Magnetics, that is to say, focusing on high performance magnetic microsensor products and so forth. He's also served as a visiting scientist at Brown University and also has, frankly, this is great, a PI for a number of federal grants and contracts, including NSF Phase 1 and Phase 2. So he is an insider and also one of us as well. He also received his PhD in physics from Brown University. So Ben, a great honor and a pleasure to have you join us, and look forward to your presentation. Welcome.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thanks to everybody for attending today. In the age of COVID, I know it's always more complicated to make time. So hopefully this will be helpful. And I'm going to look forward to answering any questions. I don't know if you can see my background now. I guess maybe you can see my video is small, so it's a little harder to see. But Martin, since you asked before I dive in here, my background is actually a this is an installation that's, I think, outside in a public space at the Miami Museum of Art, I believe. It's like a 40-foot tall kind of sculpture, and it's actually been printed by one of our portfolio companies, a company called Branch Technologies, that has new technology for large-scale additive manufacturing. So if anyone's in Miami, you're welcome to go and check that out. They're actually building stuff around the country, but I'm not entirely sure where all their different locations of their stuff is. But it's
very impressive. Very impressive. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, it's a cool technology. You can look them up on the web. They have some really nice videos as well if you're interested in learning more. Yeah, so I have very minimal slides here today, and I'm happy to go in any direction that the group wants to go. But in general, what I think I'll do here today as a first attempt is to try to focus on really folks who have not ever been part of the program before, really who are brand new to the program. And so I'm really going to try to dig in more about the overall kind of philosophy, goals, mission of our program, and what people would need to know to figure out if they might be a good fit, and less about, how to apply and what happens after, you get an award and kind of the logistics in the process, although I'm happy to answer those questions. But my goal was to make sure that I don't go too late, right? That I don't go over anyone's head here. I do have some general remarks I make about the SBIR program in general, but I don't think I need to make those here. But again, if anyone is interested, I'm happy to take questions on this. So hopefully everyone can see my screen, and hopefully someone will flash a red light to me if they're not seeing my slides. But moving forward, as Martin mentioned, we're one of many agencies, some of which you're hearing from today, that do SBIR and STTR. And as you mentioned, Martin, the budget for NSF that we spent about 200 million and change in awards to small businesses in fiscal year 20, which just concluded. Obviously, based on the programs, most of that is SBIR, and a couple of tens of millions are STTR. And the first thing to remember about the National Science Foundation is that the way that we kind of come at this program is from a first principle of basically the idea that deep technology, new innovations in science and engineering, with the ability to create new products and services that are going to be commercially unfairly competitive in the commercial market. And so our whole goal is less about procurement, less about a particular topical area, and more about basically investing in technology with the goal of creating sustainable, competitive companies, small businesses that are going to actually, have aggressive commercial goals and timelines. So to some extent, I think the first takeaway is that, if you're used to thinking about other types of funding around this kind of specific type of company that has, real innovative technology at its core, the best analogy to our program is really more of like an investor than either a customer or a funding agency that you're used to. We're really looking to have our funding, bridge a gap that's going to get you to scalable success. So although we do not take any kind of the traditional hallmarks of an investor, we don't take obviously equity stakes, we don't take, governance, board seats, things like that. But the way that we think about our funding decisions is really a lot like the way that investors think about them. We think about potential, we think about risk, we think about team very heavily. So if you're familiar with anybody who does investment in early stage technology, that's actually not a bad first approximation to some of the ways that we think. I think you've heard from a number of programs today. I think one of the things that is important to note about the NSF is that we have a very centralized program, which is to say both that when you submit a proposal, they all kind of go through the same kind of funnel. And then the entire process is basically contained within a fairly small group of people who are all basically dedicated to this program. And when I say dedicated, I don't mean passionate and hardworking, although the team really is. I mean dedicated in the sense that everyone who has kind of a significant role in this program was hired by the National Science Foundation to do this one thing well, to basically think about how to make the best investments in SBIR awards and help those companies be successful. That's the one job we do. We obviously work with colleagues in other ways, but almost all of our time is spent on these two programs, SBIR and STTR. The reason why that's important is that it's pretty easy to understand, whose opinion matters and who will make the decision. It's in most cases, you can look on our website, and as soon as you kind of understand what technology area you may fit into, you'll know that person who will basically be your point of contact throughout the process. So it's not a case where the person you talk to today and then the person who you talk to later and the person who reviews the proposal and the person who makes a decision are all different people. They're all mostly concentrated into a single person. So we tend to have kind of a vertically integrated process where each of the program directors, we lead a certain portfolio area, and we will be the person who you can reach out to and ask questions when you first engage with the program. We'll be the person who reviews your project pitch, which I'll talk about, your full proposal, who gives you feedback, who does diligence. And if you get an award, the person who guides you and mentors you and keeps in touch with you and reads your reports and closes out your project. So to some extent, I think the organization is pretty easy to understand. The advantage of having such a structure like that, where we can hire people to do this one job, is that we can actually hire people who have a very relevant mix of experience. So all of us, there's 11 program directors. All of us have both technical training, advanced degrees in our technical fields, in our STEM fields, physicists, biologists, chemical engineers, material scientists. We also all have relevant commercial experience, and not just what some people would call kind of generic industry experience, but all of us have been either startup founders or startup investors, or somehow in a role that's actually about bringing new technology to the market. So we've all been in roles similar to or equivalent to what's many of you who are thinking about applying where you find yourselves. So we try to bring those twin sets of experiences to bear as we make decisions and as we work with companies. Our awards are by grants, and actually this is going to need to be updated shortly. Our phase 1 awards are grants, and I think most of you probably understand grants versus contracts, but I'm happy to discuss that. Our phase 2s pretty soon are going to be actually cooperative agreements, and I can talk about that. But the takeaway here is that we've chosen to create a funding structure that maximizes flexibility, and the reason for that is there's a couple of reasons. One reason is that most of the time we are funding, in most cases, startup companies, very early stage companies, where the technology is not only the technology is unproven and early, but the business model and the company's operations are early and are still in flux. And so we want to have that flexibility so that if you're, not only if your R&D leads you in an unexpected direction, but if your customer discovery and your business model development leads you in an unexpected direction, that we have the ability to make sure that the funding that we're providing continues to move in a direction that's optimal for your company's commercial goals. You know, we've had companies that have really dramatically, based on the same technology, that have dramatically changed what they think their best market is. For example, I had a company that went into phase 2 as a energy company and came out as a telecommunications company. If there's a good reason for that, and you know it's based on sound fundamentals, we have the ability to really dramatically change what's in your award, what's in your scope of work, to make sure that when that pivot happens, that you are not left with a grant that doesn't actually add any value to your company. And so the program directors will work closely with the companies in the hopes that we can continue to make sure that our funding is really pushing your vision forward. In some sense, that's actually one of the real takeaways here as well, is that we've built our program to try to make sure that we can align to your company's commercial vision and not to have you align to NSF's vision. So the question that you should not be asking is NSF interested in X or Y? The question you should be asking is my stage of company, is my own company mission and the place I want to go, is that compatible with where the NSF wants to invest? And then we have, again, like everyone, we have phases. We in particular have a number of pretty significant supplements that add to a phase 2 award. Our phase 2 award is $1 million coming out of the gate, but we have the ability to, especially based on strong commercial outcomes, to add on supplements. And in most cases, in many cases, those supplements can add up to another $500,000 or more to a phase 2. So in general, if things go well, this is about a $2 million opportunity spread out over potentially 4 to 5 years for the whole, if you go through the whole process. I'm sure topics have been brought up a lot of times today, and I don't want to get into our topics too much. We have topics because people really need them. They feel like without them, they're very unsure. But I think the takeaway on topics is not that we have certain topics we focus on, but that we are trying to create with our topics extremely broad and overlapping topics so that any project from a great small business with innovative technology and with a decent kind of pitch as far as a potential commercial impact or a problem that can be solved will fit somewhere in one of these topics. And if it doesn't, then we always have the other topics area, which is listed here, which kind of takes anything that you think may not fit somewhere else. So we don't reject proposals, and we don't actually make funding decisions almost at all based on what topic you happen to land in, although the topic will determine the person who is leading the review for your proposal. So I would encourage you to not worry about topics at all, and except to the extent that, you know, it'll help you to understand who to talk to, who would actually be the decision maker for your proposal. There's one caveat, by the way, before I forget. We don't actually fund clinical trials of new pharmaceutical drugs. So if you're at that stage with a particular new molecule where you're kind of getting towards clinical trials, you may be too late for us. But we do fund pre-IND and IND work. We fund drug discovery, drug delivery, and other pharmaceutical technologies. So I kind of mentioned this in passing, but I really want to stress, I think this was mentioned at the tail end of the DARPA presentation. We're looking for early stage, high risk, unproven technology. That's the goal of phase 1 that Congress laid out. It's to demonstrate feasibility of a new technology, and that's usually at a very early stage that it has to happen. So any company that's at that kind of, I don't even know if this is ever going to work, technology stage is a good fit. For that reason and for other reasons, we have actually focused pretty heavily on startup companies. Startup companies tend to have technology that's pretty early. Once your company is 4 or 5 years old, if you're working on technology, usually it's either proven or it's not going to happen. Maybe not proven, but at least past the feasibility stage. And so, you know, we find a lot of companies that are in the first year or two are in the right sweet spot for the technology stage we're looking for. But we're also looking for startups partly because we want our funding to be impactful. We want our funding to be the difference between not just the project being successful, the specific work that you're trying to do, but we want our funding to be a critical event in the company's evolution, if possible. Not always, but it's a big plus for us that our funding can be said to basically, in some cases, make the difference between company success and failure. You know, we could probably find a way to fund companies that are kind of on their way to success, but that wouldn't really have much impact in terms of what our role to play is. So the takeaway here is that we're not looking for either seasoned, proven companies with an established track record, nor are we looking for folks who have a lot of experience with government funding. It's not on this data, it's not on the slide, but consistently a little more than half of our phase 1 awards are actually being made to companies where that proposal that they submitted that we made an award for was the first ever proposal they submitted to the NSF. So more than half of our companies are in that boat. So please don't feel like the learning curve, although it is steep, is going to be a huge barrier to getting funded. We're not looking for perfect proposals. We're looking for great entrepreneurs. The other takeaway here that I assume you can, if you think about it, you can kind of infer is because of the second data point here, which is that 90% of our companies that get a phase 1 have never had a phase 2 from anybody. If you go through the process and you're successful and get a phase 1 and phase 2 from NSF, the chances are that you will not be back. Now you can apply as many times as you want, but the bar is higher if you've been awarded a phase 2 by us and you're coming back. And part of that is just because you've had more of a chance than the first time applicants that we're looking at, and part of it is because we want to try to touch as many companies as possible. And every award we give as a second award or a third award to a company we funded before is a new company that doesn't get their first chance. So you should keep in mind that this funding is supposed to be catalytic funding, but it's a means to an end. And the idea is that there is some kind of pretty strong tendency towards this being a time-limited engagement between your company, and the NSF. Our goal is actually that by the time your phase 2 is over, that the amount of funding that we provide is not even worth your time. That's a success story. So hopefully many of you will get there. Okay, so I think I've covered a lot of this, but again, the goal here is that our funding can really help your company succeed. Our funding is only, as you all probably know by now, our funding is only for technical research and development. That's the congressional limitation. And so if your company cannot be significantly moved forward commercially based on that technical R&D, if there's not huge technical hurdles, which is what you would need to do R&D to resolve, then you're not a good fit. But if you do have those show-stopping hurdles and you can't move your company forward without really starting to retire that technical risk, then you might be a good fit. The flip side of the technical risk is that, technical risk is not something anybody would want, but the flip side is that once you retire that technical risk, it's often correlated that what you end up with is actually a product or service that is based on a defensible technical innovation, which both creates a unique and unfair competitive advantage in the market and also creates the ability for you to defend yourself from competitors. Sometimes that's with patents, sometimes with trade secrets, sometimes it's other means, but you're a good fit if you can show that you have some way to do something that nobody else in the world, including others who know your field, could do for whatever reason. We're looking for companies that are structured and organized for aggressive commercialization. And there's a lot of people who talk and are experts in understanding how that structure works, but really we're looking for single focus, dedicated, small teams, but teams that have, that are committed to this effort for at least the next few years, and that their goal is actually to have the product or service get in the hands of customers and users, and not just to actually do R&D as kind of a goal. And then finally, as it kind of correlates what I just mentioned, you can really make yourself stronger within our review process by showing that you have done homework on the market and customer. And this doesn't mean somebody is promised to buy the product. It really is, to Martin's point, it's really the kind of I-Core customer discovery style of early engagement with markets and customers at the phase 1 stage, at least. Companies that are really laser focused on what the customer needs tend to be much better at building a product that satisfies those needs. On the flip side, if your goal is to do basic research, if the goal of what you're trying to do in the lab is to learn something that is not necessarily going to directly result in a new product or service in a predictable way, that's actually something that we have lots of colleagues at NSF who would love to talk to you, but that's not the goal of SBIR STTR. If your goal is to do contract R&D and the goal is our company wants to serve an agency because our business model and our mission is to kind of serve the government, that's great. A lot of other agencies, I suspect, would love to talk to you, but at the NSF, if you don't have your own kind of strong commercial vision for what your company is going to do with the product we're helping you to develop outside of the government, and in some cases your customers could be in the government, but in most cases they're not. If you don't have that strong vision, then you may not be a good fit for us. And then finally, you can be too late. You can be too late, especially in the sense that the technical risk of your innovation may have been reduced. And so if you're past the high risk show-stopping technical brick wall phase of developing the product and you're just trying to build out, maybe it's an innovative technology, but maybe you kind of know it works and now you're trying to scale it up or make it somewhat better. That's something that we would pay for as a follow-on phase 2 or phase 2B award, but for phase 1, that would not be a good fit. We're really looking for something that is still really touch and go from the sense of technical viability. Okay, and then I can't remember who it was who said that if you ever get lucky enough to go and get in front of a room of people, you always have to have an ask. Maybe it was Guy Kawasaki, but here's the ask. If you're interested in kind of taking the next step, obviously you're welcome to reach out to us at any time to ask questions, but the next formal step, although it's pretty lightweight, is what we call the project pitch. This is required at NSF. If you want to submit a full proposal, you have to go through this process. It's essentially a number of questions. It ends up being about 1,000 or 1,500 words total. Really just the outlines of what you think your project would be. That you hope is a good fit for the program. It's submitted online at our website, which is seedfund.nsf.gov. And it's again, just the first paragraph about the technology, the first paragraph about what the work you need to do is, and a little bit about the team and the market. And that pitch is going to be reviewed by a program director within 3 weeks at most, although the average time of response is about a week. And they're going to basically tell you whether they think it might be a good fit. Now, they won't tell you if it is a good fit, but they will tell you if it's definitely not a good fit. And the way they do that is by either inviting or not inviting a full proposal. These are accepted anytime. They don't require any other government registrations or even a company incorporation. You can submit them even when your company is just a gleam in your eye if you want. If you do get to the full proposal stage, you do then need to go through the normal registrations that I suspect many of you have heard about or are thinking about. Full proposals are accepted right now that we have quarterly submission windows this year. And then after this December, we'll have a new solicitation announced or some news about what the next solicitations will look like. But if you get your project pitch invited, if you say submit a pitch now and you're invited to submit a full proposal, you don't actually have to get it in the current submission in solicitation. You could actually apply to any solicitation that we offer in 2021. And obviously we'll definitely have multiple submission windows open in 2021 as well. And so this, again, there's not a whole lot of risk to this in terms of, I think it takes most people about an hour to submit it. Could be less if you really have planned ahead. And you also get feedback with this, right? You'll get feedback, and you'll get feedback from the person who we have decided is the actual program director who will lead the review of your full proposal. So you'll know at that point exactly who the person is who will decide on whether you're going to get funded at the end of the day. Hopefully that's helpful. And obviously you can go on the project pitch site and you can kind of scope it out and see what's asked before submitting. If you don't get invited to submit a full proposal, worst case scenario is you can resubmit or you can submit a second idea, although you're only permitted to have one pitch in process at a time. And if you get a pitch not invited, you have to wait till the next quarterly window to resubmit the same pitch. And that's all I have for slides. I know that was very somewhat ad hoc and definitely not in the weeds, but I'm happy to go into as much depth on anything you guys are interested in. And hopefully that was a good intro.
Ben, it was a very good intro, and it was also great that you kept it brief in this case, because it looks like there are a ton of questions, and that is absolutely no surprise whatsoever. I think everyone has also learned the hard way. It's either them asking questions or they have to deal with mine. So I think they always would prefer theirs. So anyway, Asina, good question. Is it possible to get an award from both, say, the NSF and another department like energy or education? Does that happen?
Yeah, for sure. The only requirements, the only things you need to worry about if you're thinking about multiple agencies are that we won't fund overlapping work. You know, two agencies or two projects that are overlapping can't both be funded. You're welcome to apply with overlapping or equivalent projects, but you have to tell all the agencies about the different proposals that are overlapping. And then, of course, if one of those agencies funds something that's overlapping with something that's in progress elsewhere, you need to withdraw the one that's in progress. But you could also submit theoretically proposals to multiple agencies that don't technically overlap in terms of the scope of work, but that maybe are focused on the same commercial effort. So we find a lot of our companies, as you can see, we cover a lot of technical ground. And so a lot of our companies in our portfolio do get funding from NIH, DOE, NASA, DOD. Many times our funding is a year or two or three before, but not always. And so, yeah, you should definitely cast a wide net. As long as you tell different agencies who else you're working with, you're usually not going to get yourself into too much trouble.
Okay. Thanks, Ben, very much. And Ed, you're killing me here. This is a long question, and let's see if I can plow through this for you. And so let me know, Ed, if I don't do you right here. So it looks like, Ben, that Ed had indeed submitted a project pitch, and he received clearance to prepare a full proposal. Unfortunately for Ed, the time window that he was given is going to expire. What is this month? October. So it'll expire November next month. Due to COVID-19 implications, he experienced several research partners going out of business, unfortunately, shutdowns of lab facilities and burdened with virtual learning training and so forth. Bottom line, so it's unlikely a quality proposal can be submitted within a one-year time frame. What do you think he should do? Should he repitch, Ben, and then maybe just simply start the whole process over again at this stage?
Yeah, submit a new pitch. You're welcome to reach out to the person who invited the last pitch with this information. In most cases, you know, we're not trying to be dogmatic about this. The goal of having to pitch it expire within a year is to try to give some sense of urgency. You know, our goal is to get you moving, and you know, having deadlines helps people submit. I'm sure many of the faculty members here understand that that phenomenon. But in general, if a project was invited as a good potential fit a year ago, in most cases, you know, it's got a good chance of being invited again. Obviously, there are some cases where if something significant has changed, then, you know, that's the reason why we want to be able to look at it and not have the pitches last indefinitely. But yeah, Ed, you can submit the pitch again and maybe let the program director understand the circumstances so that they have some context.
Thanks, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcus has a question that we get asked a lot here at UC Riverside. Do you allow building prototypes in phase one? And I'll just insert in addition to that, and if so, what would be the terms or conditions, I suppose, if any?
Yeah, sure. I mean, lots of companies do build prototypes in phase one. I mean, I think the way to think about phase one is that, you know, as I mentioned, that the term Congress gives to phase one across the program is feasibility demonstration, which is another way of saying kind of technical risk reduction, right? So I think the best way to think about phase one is to figure out, based on the amount of money we're going to give you, what is the most efficient way to reduce technical risk? What is the best way to prove to yourself that technical showstoppers can be overcome? And a prototype is one way to do that. Prototype, you know, building a prototype will get rid of various kinds of technical risks, not necessarily all of them, but depending on what your project is, that might be the most efficient mechanism, and therefore you can definitely build one. In some cases, the best way to reduce risk is actually something else. It's maybe pre-prototype or it's maybe post-prototype. So I think the goal here is to have you understand your technology, lay out the risks, convince us what those are, and then based on what they are, explain how the best, if you think building a prototype is a way to retire that risk, to kind of explain how that connects to your research plan. But yeah, we're trying not to be dogmatic in phase one. Anything that's technical R&D is allowed. The other question you had is around terms and conditions, and typically, you know, anything you buy or build with our funding eventually vests with the company at the end of the period. And so you're welcome to do anything you want with that prototype, although you should not like break it down or sell it until the project is over, because until we know you don't need it for the project anymore, we don't want you messing too much with it. But yeah, once the project is over, it's your property. You can do with it whatever you like.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. I think the reason for his question is I believe that he may have read on your site or elsewhere that you're not in the business of funding just simply the engineering or building of a product. It's really more again phase one efficacy, feasibility concept.
Yeah, sorry, that might have been unclear. I think manufacturing in the sense of like building something you know how to build is not something we focus on in phase one, unless the manufacturing act itself does kind of relate to technical risk. But yeah, the sense of manufacturing, the way that would be kind of defined normally in the larger society as, you know, again, building a product with a repeatable proven process is not something that's usually a good phase one fit.
Yep, got it.
Yeah.
And Amit, I think that your question to Ben, you can probably find it. In fact, I'm confident that you would find it on the NSF site. But Ben, his question, and also, by the way, you had addressed it in one of your slides, which had shown all of the various categories or topics or subject matters that you have a program manager or director expressly devoted to, I believe. But anyway, he's working on a next generation water loss tracking and compliance, and just wanted to find out who he should reach out to and so forth, or at least I think what you had indicated, do your homework, get on the NSF site and take a look at those respectively. But anyway, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think Anna Brady Estevez or Rajesh Mehta, one of the two, would probably handle most things in the water space, depending on what the actual innovation is. But I wouldn't even worry about that. What I would do is actually go through, excuse me one second. Sorry about that.
No
virtual school going on next door. Basically, what I would do is I would submit a project pitch, and the project pitch is one way to, obviously you have to do it anyway, and it doesn't usually require you having made contact with somebody. And once we look at what you're doing, we can tell you who to talk to, because the person who responds will be your person, your guy or gal. So yeah, I would not feel like you need to somehow establish a relationship before that. If anything, you know, once the project pitch is invited, assuming it is invited, then you have kind of already established communication, and you can ask questions of that person. But yeah, I think trying to find the right topic is not something I would worry too much about.
Okay, great, thanks. And Kieran's question has to do with company age. Is that a criterion to reject a proposal? I mean, you wouldn't accept a proposal from a gray hair or a blue hair or someone like that, right?
No, of course we would.
Oh, you would? Okay, great.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I wasn't like this when I applied, but I'm definitely getting pretty gray. My daughter now draws my hair gray when she draws us, which is a landmark for my life, I guess.
You've reached that threshold.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so no, company age is not an explicit criterion. That said, you can go to our site and read our criteria, and one of the criteria, as I mentioned, is will NSF funding be catalytic to the kind of commercial success of the company, or at least of the project? And so if your company is 10 or 15 or 20 years old and is established, then the thing you'll have to really do is to make sure that you explain how the company's obviously been, if it's been around for a while, you can't really say it's going to make the company not fail, I suspect. But if you want to say, look, with this funding, we can be much bigger, much more scalable, then that's the argument you need to make, that there's a big delta between what the company is today and what the company could be, because we're really looking to help catalyze those big changes, those big scalable, unicorn type companies if possible. So that would be one piece, and the other piece would be, if your company is existing and has a track record, you'd have to show, you'll be judged on that track record. If you've been in the business of trying to commercialize and for 10 or 15 years and you've done well, then that'll be a plus. And if you haven't done so well, then that'll be a minus, I suspect. Not to say that new companies aren't, are penalized for it. But the idea there is that if there is a track record, it's a very important part of the criteria. But yeah, I mean, the age of the company in the sense of how long it's been around, you should just filter that through the criteria that we have and try to understand the implications.
Great. Thanks, Ben, for that. So Johnny has this question. He wanted to see if you could help him better understand what you meant by staffed for aggressive commercialization. What's that look like in practice? The reason why he's asking that is he's thinking that most phase one applicants, it may possibly be incongruous if less than 10 people are still doing, significant tech R&D. So he just wanted a clarification of what you meant by that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so I mean, our goal is to have you commercialize as fast as possible, but not faster, right? And so we understand we are. I think I can claim this without being hypercritical. I think we can consider ourselves pretty patient capital. We don't mandate that your company get to market in any fixed period of time, and certainly we have companies say it's going to be a decade, and we don't bat an eye at that. I think we tend to be willing to wait, but we want to wait because of the fundamentals of the technology, because it takes a long time to scale up a new chemical process or a new biomedical device. It takes a lot of, regulatory time and work. And so the idea about staffing is not necessarily that staffing has to be like a number of people has to be high. You have to have veteran people involved. The goal is that there's a certain kind of DNA in a company that is kind of commercially focused. Tends to be that they may be a small team, but the team tends to be all fully on board, that the people who run the company that's their number one professional priority, that they have a certain intangibles, integrity, work ethic. And there's a lot of people who write about this. For example, if the book called Founder's Dilemma by Noam Wasserman is an interesting study on this. Y Combinator, actually, that Paul Graham writes a lot about kind of the founders, the characteristics of founders that succeed. And I think we look for similar characteristics in those. So let me give you an example, maybe, since I'm not being super clear about what's not a good model. If the person who runs the company and who makes the final decisions is not willing to work on the company more than 1 day a week, that's a problem, because your company is only going to actually make progress 1 day a week. That's not a company that's going to move fast enough to get to market. And if the person who actually owns the company is not committed enough to the company to jump in full with both feet and burn the boats, then that's a sign that they may not be as committed as they need to be to get through a very difficult journey. So we're looking for passion, integrity, work ethic, and full commitment, full attention of the founding team and of the people who run the company. That's kind of the most biggest piece at the beginning is we want the company to be trying to do one thing well, and we want the team to be fully committed and the people who matter to be fully committed. I'm happy to talk more about that journey, but honestly, there's a lot of other people who write more eloquently about what you look for in startup founders. And so I can send you links offline, but I suspect if you go to some of the well-known startup thought leaders, you can probably get a similar take.
Great. And Ainun, a researcher here at UC Riverside, she has a cell therapy grant that is now being reviewed by the NSF.
Okay.
So while that is going on, is it okay for her to submit a new pitch for a different initiative?
Yeah, so we don't allow that until the proposal is fully decided and you get a notification on that proposal. And the reason for that, and this goes for a pitch, right? So as soon as you submit a pitch, we're kind of expecting you to follow that into a full proposal and then to wait till that full proposal is decided to consider something else. And I think this gets back to what the question I just mentioned, which is about focus. Typically, if you have 5 different things you want to do, that's fine. But in our experience, you really have to do them serially. And you try one thing and you focus on it entirely, and it may not work out, and then you can try the second thing. But in our experience, for the aggressive commercial outcomes we're looking for, where you're going to scale to a big opportunity, we don't really see companies be successful other than doing one thing well. I haven't seen a company in my portfolio do 2 different technologies or 2 different markets well. And that goes for companies even who are gotten quite big, right? So, we've had companies that have gotten to $1 billion and they're still only doing really one thing and trying to do that one thing well. So the reason we have this rule is, as I mentioned, you may have multiple things and you're not sure which one of them is the the best fit for NSF. In that case, what I would recommend you do is to really understand for your company vision, what is the number one priority for your company, and then submit that to NSF. We would rather have you be focused as your first priority on what you submit to us than it somehow be more interesting to us. We want, the only way this works is if you are like laser focused on one really good idea and one really good opportunity. So yeah, you have to do one thing at a time with us. That's kind of the general rule.
Got it. Thanks. That helps a lot, Ben. So Jessica, I hope I'm going to do you right here on your question. And if I don't, send another one out as quickly as you can. So anyway, Jessica, Ben, was denied on a project pitch. And I believe the reason for the denial had to do with insufficient I hope I'm doing this right, Jessica, insufficient discussion on actual or specific technical innovation. So does the NSF require, let me put it another way, how much detail does the NSF require for process and steps relative to this particular innovation? I guess with regard to, I'm going to guess here, Jessica, study approach or otherwise.
Yeah, so in general, the project pitches, we only reject them for a couple of reasons. There's a couple of administrative reasons that are pretty rare, but the main reasons we reject them are for, as she mentioned, basically that we don't see the contours of a unique technical innovation, or that we don't see that the work you're trying to get done is appropriate for our program. And the first one is by far the biggest reason we don't invite. Our criteria, involve innovation. They involved impact on society, impact on the market, commercial outcomes. But for the project pitch, we're really just trying to figure out, is there a unique technical approach that is only this team in the world can do? And so is there another, if another team were basically knew what you knew, is what I would say, Jessica. If another team knew what you knew, they understood the market, why would your approach be something they couldn't replicate? That's the way to think about, I think that's the best way to think about technical innovation from our point of view. And so it may be that just didn't come across enough. I think we're trying to figure out better language on our side about how to communicate this, because this is the critical question we ask. We're really trying to understand what is the novel differentiated technology. So, the reason that that's really important to us is, we're going to give you funding to do R&D. R&D is only actually something that a small business, commercial small business, should probably be doing if they do have risky technology, right? If your technology, if you know your product will work given enough time and money, then what you need to do is either marketing, sales, or engineering, not R&D. And so what you need to really do if you want to resubmit, and you're welcome to, again, resubmit a pitch if it was not invited, explain to us not the nail that you're hitting, the problem you're solving, or the market opportunity. Explain to us why your hammer is unique. Explain to us, and you may not need to get into the technical weeds of your IP or proprietary technology, but give us enough to understand why somebody else couldn't do the same thing, why it's not an intuitive approach, why it's innovative and disruptive, and will be much better if you make it work. So one of the examples I guess I could use is, we funded a company in the 90s called Interlace, which developed laser eye surgery, and the idea of basically using a laser to fix somebody's eyesight is kind of a risky and innovative technical approach, right? Up until that point, people use scalpels and knives to actually physically cut your eye to do eye surgery. And so in that sense, you could see that they had basically patented technology. So even if someone else thought of it, they couldn't use a laser in the same way. And they also had some trade secrets behind how they could actually use a laser. So in that sense, if they had been in this hypothetical situation and they had submitted a pitch, they would have basically said, look, we want to fix the eye. It's going to be a much better process. It's going to have fewer side effects. It's going to be much better for the patient. And the way we're going to do it is by using photons instead of an actual mechanical blade. And so that would be probably enough, because it's pretty obvious by then that it's a different approach. So you don't have to get too much into detail, but you have to really give us something that seems like an unproven, untested, differentiated way to do something.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
I'm
And
sorry, Jessica. I don't know if I answered your question well, but please connect with me offline if I whiff that one.
no worries. And Jessica, in answer to your second question, we do indeed work with you. We're pretty rigorous about that on both the project pitch and of course the content of the proposals and so forth. We have a mantra: you can take the pain and torture from people like me, or you can go on your own and see what happens with the NSF. So the choice is yours. Most people decide to get abused by us first. Okie doke. Thomas asks Ben, do you have examples or templates that they might be able to use to give them a better idea on what a successful application looks like?
We don't. We get asked this question a lot, and I can completely understand the urge. We don't provide anything like a successful application for either stage of our process, and you know, the reason is, again, like, we're trying to really get your unique. We're trying to get inside your head as an entrepreneur, and as soon as we give an example of something successful, you'll feel tempted to conform and try to kind of put yourself into somebody else's shoes and or somebody else's mold. And so we don't provide that, but I understand the urge, and I understand the wanting to kind of see what it looks like. And so what I would recommend is that you know, we have funded about 3,000 different small businesses over the last decade. All of those are public, right? All the contact information is public. That's part of the government's rules. And so you know, I would encourage you to reach out and see if those folks would be willing to either give you advice or even share a document with you. I know that when I was applying for these, I did it both ways. I had somebody help share kind of parts of their proposal before I had submitted, and I also shared my successful proposals with other people. So I think entrepreneurs usually are willing to help other entrepreneurs, and I would encourage you to be enterprising and see if you can get it that way. But in general, I think the guidance, if you're not able to actually get an example proposal, is just to try to see if a few people can take a look at your arguments, right? What we're looking for is really a hybrid of like a kind of a pitch, like an investment pitch and like a research proposal. And there should be people in your world who understand both of those documents very well, I suspect, for most of you. And so I would have people who know both of those sides or both sides take a look at your document and just give you an interested, intelligent, but, you know, non-expert view of your proposal. And usually, again, you know, it's a selling document. And so if somebody else can follow the flow of the arguments, that's a really good sign.
Great, thanks, Ben. And Anonymous has a question. Can we have co-PIs for phase one? You know, and his or her example is, well, maybe one PI is focusing on management research strategy. The other one might be for writing code, something like that. Is that doable?
So the technical definition of PI and co-PI, we don't technically use the term co-PI for our phase one efforts, and so you'll never see a listed co-PI for an SBIR. For STTR projects, the co-PI is the person who leads the university, the research partner subaward. But I do think the general question about having multiple people kind of sharing the load is a great idea. You're welcome to list multiple what we call senior personnel, which is not quite a co-PI, but it is multiple kind of specialized people where you're going to be able to give more information about their skills and expertise. And honestly, I think just more generally, if you can find someone who works well, if you can have multiple co-founders in a way that they work together well and they complement each other, I think going through this journey with more than one co-founder, there's a lot of literature on this, by the way. Going through the journey with more than one co-founder is more likely to succeed and way less soul crushing, to use a harsh word, than trying to be a single founder. Now, you'll need multiple people. Pretty quickly, you'll need multiple people working on your company. Even if you get a phase one, it's probably hard to do with just one person. But I think especially having that idea of a co-founder where maybe they weren't there at the beginning of the company, but they're a co-founder in the sense that the two of you or the three of you are all kind of making the big decisions together as a team, and supporting each other. I can't speak highly enough of like the value that it has to have 2 or 3 co-founders who work well together. That is like one of those magic secret sauces for our startups that if you get it, it's a huge blessing to your company. The hard problem is it's hard to create that out of thin air. So.
And also, just if I can add, Ben, because we work with about 200 startups here in the region. And if you're gonna want to raise capital after your SBIR, then you're definitely going to need more than one founder. It is virtually impossible to get venture funded as a solo founder. It has happened, so you don't need to put in the chat all the people that you've heard of. But in general, it's stacked against you. So definitely, Ben's right. Try to build a very strong co-founder and team in general if you're going to seek funding after SBIR. Thanks, Ben.
That's a great point. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott, indeed. Okay, so Gene, your question is with regard to, I believe, you're trying to make a determination on what you are proposing for your phase 1 proof of concept and feasibility initiative with regard to whether it can be accomplished within a time frame. So Ben, I'm not entirely certain how you would answer that, but give it your best shot.
Yeah, I think I took a look at that question. I think the question is, I think the way I interpreted it was the idea is we give you a fixed amount of money that's set, and obviously technical feasibility can take varying amounts of money depending on the technology and the area. And so the question is, if getting to technical feasibility doesn't take the right amount of money that matches with our phase 1 amounts, what do we do? And I think the idea there is like, this is a great discussion to have, especially once your pitch is invited with the program director, if they're willing to weigh in. But and obviously their guidance would trump mine because they'll know your industry better than I do and your technology, unless you're in my portfolio. But I think the goal is really to kind of line these things up by the biggest showstoppers, if possible, especially if there's things that take fewer dollars, and to kind of prioritize things based on the risk versus the amount of money it takes to overcome that risk, and try to go down the list, right? You're not going to get to all the technical risks, but to maximize the amount of risk reduction that you can do in phase 1, even if you're not there yet at the end of phase 1, is the way to go. And as somebody who ran the materials portfolio for many years, there's a lot of materials technologies that go into phase 2 very very risky still. So that's fine, but the ability to show solid progress based on a $250,000 roughly investment in phase 1, and to show that you've come a long way is probably more important than actually getting to, feasibility demonstration in the way that we look at phase 2.
Got it. Stuart was wondering, Ben, if there's a scoring rubric for project pitches.
Yeah, no, we don't use rubrics for either project pitches or for full proposals. The program directors take the advice of the experts that we bring in. We don't bring in experts for the pitch, but we bring in experts for the full proposal from outside of NSF. And then we make a decision that's really more of a qualitative call. Now, that you will get ratings, you will get graded on a 5-point scale by the reviewers, but honestly, the decision is not as correlated with the scores as you think, because, to be very honest, the peer review process that we use is a great thing. It has a lot of advantages, especially on the scientific side. For the science and technology, external peer review is the gold standard. For the startup side of things, when you're trying to evaluate a new team and a new startup, the document and the peer review is not perfect for that. It's not built for that. And so the program directors in that side of the review, they have the autonomy to kind of use their own experience and their own expertise and their own diligence that's done directly with your company in some cases to try to make the call. And so we don't use a rubric because we don't want to constrain the program director's autonomy, because the machine that we use to review these it's built on the best practices for science, but it's not totally built on the best practices for investment. And so in that sense, we want to have a little bit of leeway. I hope that answers your question.
So Ben, Kieran has a geospatial platform and is planning on submitting a proposal to you folks, but it supports multiple applications, all of which would need their own individual R&D needs. How should he handle that? Should he submit multiple applications, or what would you recommend?
I would recommend focusing on the first use case in our phase 1, at least. Once you get a phase 1, you'll be talking to the program director, and then you have lots of ways to figure out how to move forward. But until then, I would pick the use case that you think has the deepest, most differentiated value proposition based on your technology, right? So the one where to use ICOR terminology, and ICOR and SBIR are extremely closely linked at NSF. The application where the customers and users are reaching out across the table and grabbing you by the collar and saying, I have to have this technology because it solves this huge problem. So I would focus on one thing at a time. And again, if you have a core technology, you might have a lot of use cases. And our experience for those types of companies is that you really want to get some significant traction, meaning people paying you in the first use case before you focus too much on the second use case. And in a lot of cases, honestly, by that time you just you'll get acquired before you start too much on the secondary use cases, but or otherwise be successful. And so I would focus on that first deepest use case where customer discovery should be really the guide that you can use to figure out where to go and what to do first.
Great. And this is a question to Misty, a logistics question here. It's 11:55 our time, and where Ben is 2:55, and I know that he needs to make a transition into one-on-ones. My thoughts are that if it's acceptable to you, Ben, there are still a bunch of questions here. Would it be possible to put them in a nice package and maybe get them out to you in some way, or do you have any thoughts on there's maybe about 10 or 12 or more questions that we still have here, and we only have about 4 minutes to go before we need to release you to the one-on-ones and so forth. What do you think we can do, Misty?
Well, if it's all right with you, Ben, could we send you those questions and get some answers back to the attendees?
Yeah, or just I can send you a link where people can set up times to talk to me.
Okay.
For those of you, and the other thing is, again, I don't know if you guys need to move on, but I think Misty, you said my first one-on-one is not till 12:20 your time, right?
Right.
Am I right about that? So I don't know if you guys can stick on, but if others who still have questions have another few minutes, I'm happy to try to tackle a few more now. But otherwise, yeah, if you want to send them to me with the right coordinates where I can send them back to.
Yeah, we can hang on. We're available, so.
Okay, another 5 or 10 minutes or something, Misty.
Sure.
Okay, let's go for it. Thanks so much for that, Ben. Much appreciated.
I'll try to be less verbose too. I don't want to. I'd rather get it to as many as we can. So
love the verbosity, though. I mean, it's very helpful. So yeah, it's, pluses and minuses there. So back to Jessica. Yeah, some people ask this question a lot. Can they insert hyperlinks to attach, to attach drawings or company webs on? I guess in her case, she's thinking about her project pitch again. Is that advisable?
Yeah, you definitely can.
Okay.
Again, in most cases, the pitch you should be able to do what you need to do in a few sentences, but if a link helps, it's not a problem. You can definitely do that. I think you can only attach a single figure, but I think links you can attach as many as you like. Okay.
And BH has a question. Apparently, he or she had submitted a COVID-19, might have been in response to Dear Colleague, not entirely certain, or maybe after Dear Colleague was concluded. I guess it was a June deadline. How are things going there? Are there still considerations or proposals? He's still awaiting to hear back, yay or nay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had a lot of interest in the COVID-related projects. If you submitted your proposal, it sounded like they did before the kind of early June window closing. Most of those proposals are many of them have already been decided, but many of them are still ongoing. And so my guess would be if you're in that batch, and I don't know anything about this specific case, obviously, you would probably hear back, if you haven't already, sometime. You'd hear something probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks, if not sooner than that. I think more than half of those have already been decided, but they have been. We did get basically as many proposals for COVID as we get in a year for everything, and we got them in 6 weeks. So it's taken a little bit longer than we thought, but yeah, most of those are kind of starting to wind down now. So hopefully it's not too long.
And Johnny's question is with regard to a tech project. It started in a Canadian lab, but the IP is now owned and the project was taken over by a startup here in the USA. Mm-hmm. Still high technical risk. Any eligibility issues there at all?
No, that's fine.
None whatsoever.
Yeah,
right?
no, none whatsoever. Yeah. Yeah, the nationality of the technology is not something we consider, but if the Canadian lab hadn't given the rights to the startup, then you could still apply, but then there'd obviously be more of a discussion we'd have to have. But if you own the rights to the IP, it doesn't matter who started, who created it.
Okay, and this may seem obvious, but maybe not, but Anonymous is back. She'd indicated, or he, excuse me. First of all, thank you for a great presentation, and absolutely ditto, I think, from all of us. But you ended up your presentation by saying if your pitch is not accepted, you can repitch it during the next funding cycle. So Anonymous assumes there is no point in resubmitting the same pitch idea, right?
I mean, without having kind of clarified or changed it significantly, no. You know, it's not there. There's no randomness in the sense that, you know, you just keep trying the same thing and you might have a different result. But the idea is that, you know, if you're able to kind of significantly strengthen it or change it in ways that would make it different, then you could resubmit. Yeah.
Okay. And again, thanks for the great talk. You're going to be getting a lot of those encomiums here, but with regard to budget restrictions on work done, I guess outside of her company, it was outsourced and so forth. I'm not certain what your question was here, but I think what she is mostly interested in, what if the work is international? And I believe what she may be referring to is that she may be allocating work to be done outside of the US. I'm guessing at that one, Juana, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the SBIR legislation makes it so that all the work that we pay for, so all the funding that you're using from the NSF on the award, that, you know, the people that are being paid directly from those funds should be done while those people are inside the US. Under rare and unusual circumstances, you can ask for a waiver for that if there's no other way to do the work. And obviously you can buy things from companies that are not American if there's no kind of equivalent American source of funds, but especially for the people working, you need to have a really good reason to pay them with our funding outside the US. But, you know, if your company wants to do stuff outside the US, you know, with other people's funding, obviously you're welcome to do that. And of course, markets that are international are no problem. So it's really just about where our funding is being spent.
Great. And Jasminka, your question is identical to Anonymous. So we'll just move on, and thank you for both of you for that question. Okay. All right, Jean, does it help or hurt to mention that a less risky platform is being proposed to an NIA agency, and the risky technology is being presented to the NSF?
I mean, again, I think the other proposal would not probably affect things, or the other technology, as long as we didn't have reason to question the focus of the company, right? The whole idea of trying to do one thing at a time. So I think absent that concern, I don't think it would make a difference. But that concern could potentially be an issue if we felt like you were trying to push forward multiple deep technical efforts, especially if you have a small team. That would be potentially an issue.
Okay, great. And Eric, welcome. And so Ben, Eric was asking, he is one of our colleagues, by the way. Eric was asking if you could provide some help on whether or not, and if so, what would they be allowable percentages or dollar breakdowns, if any, of the grants that could be spent on, say, capital equipment, that is to say those exceeding 5,000 versus the consumables, salaries, subcontracted work, indirect costs, intellectual property, and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, my general comment on budgets is that we can almost always change and fix a budget during diligence if you think the rest of the proposal looks strong. And so the budget prep is not almost ever the reason we make a decision one way or the other. As far as what you can pay for, in phase one, we don't permit equipment. Phase two, you can buy equipment. We always permit salaries. We always permit indirect costs, you know, allowable indirect costs. Intellectual property is not something that Congress lets us pay for because it's not technically a technical R&D. It's obviously important for your company, but it's not in the purview of the technical work we're supposed to fund. You can pay for that with your fee, which, as you know, most of the agencies allow you to take a fee. You can use that fee for anything you want. And then as far as the subawards, there's a limit to how much of a project you can outsource, and that includes funding to subawards, and it includes funding to consultants. For an SBIR phase one, that's a third of the total budget. And for an STTR, it's 60%.
Good.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. And Bradley, I'm blasting through these, so I apologize.
No, that's fine.
So Bradley is asking a question. It was the question I was going to ask you too, Ben, by the way. You had mentioned cooperative agreements as maybe a relative to a restructuring, if we understood correctly, relative to phase 2. So wondered if you could maybe talk a bit about that. And I think, Bradley, you were asking about possibly the supplemental funding, Ben, that you had referenced also. Might be the matching funds, I believe, if not something else.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the move to a cooperative agreements has happened for the most recent cohort of our phase 2 awards. It won't change any of the things I said today in terms of, you know, what we're looking to do and our philosophy. In fact, the cooperative agreement was something we created in order to kind of have an instrument that we think is best aligned with the things I talked about today. The idea being that, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the government, but that a cooperative agreement is like a grant, except for it allows for what the law calls significant involvement by the government. And the reason that the cooperative agreement we think is advantageous is because for most of you as brand new startups, you've not gone through the process before. You're not experts in running government grants, and you may not also be experts in being entrepreneurs. And so the government involvement allows us to have a little more engagement, to be a little more supportive, and to have a little more oversight over you as in general, a type of new awardee that is not as seasoned and not as up with the regulations as most of NSF's awardees. So it just allows us to work together more closely, basically. But it doesn't signal any other change in our priorities. I'm sorry, I forgot your second question. There was a two-part question there, Martin.
It was with regard to, and again, I'm guessing from Bradley your question here, but I believe he was talking about the funding you had touched upon, and so I was assuming it was the
supplemental funding.
Supplemental, right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so this is for phase 2 awardees. There's a bunch of supplements. You can go to our website, the for phase 2 awardees section, and you can read about them. But the main ones are really around commercial success. So there's 2 in particular that are the biggest dollar value. One is called the phase 2B, which is essentially something you become eligible for by raising third-party funding, whether it be sales or investments. That's based on the technology that we're building, helping you to build. So it's kind of like an incentive for you to go out and start monetizing or getting investment behind your technology. That's up to another $500,000. So every year, about 50 of our phase 2 awardees do raise money or start selling their product, and they apply and they get phase 2B awards. The other one is called the Technology Enhancement for Commercial Partnerships, which is essentially just an additional 20% above your phase 2 base award based on you making really strong commercial inroads with either partners or customers and showing that you're on the cusp of a big commercial win with your technology that needs to be unlocked by additional R&D funding from NSF. So these are both basically our way to keep you moving forward commercially during phase 2 and to give you the option to kind of extend the amount of your award if you're making good progress towards market.
Terrific. And a quick question from Sina. He is asking if maybe just a little bit more elaboration in terms of what are your decision-making criteria relative to the project pitch again?
Yeah, so I mean, two big reasons. There's some other small things, but the 2 big criteria for not being a good fit is if we don't see kind of a unique, innovative technology approach, that the hammer you're using to hit the nail is a hammer that somebody else in the field could think of. It's not something that's unique to you. It's something that, you know, multiple people could probably build the same thing. It's not something you can defend yourself from. And again, this is really a high-level description of such an innovation. So for example, we're going to use a laser to fix your eyesight, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is, again, that we're going to ask you to understand, like, if you get this funding, like, what are you going to try to do technically, and how is that work going to support the commercial push towards market for your product? And so if the funding you need is not for R&D, if you need money to build up, to do marketing and sales, to build up manufacturing, to optimize, to do things that are really not in the purview of high risk reduction via R&D, then you might not be a good fit, and that would be the other reason we typically don't invite a pitch. And so we don't really have a set of criteria, but those are the 2 big things that tend to make companies not a good fit for us based on that small amount of information that we get in the pitch.
Great. And I think just one final question, and Misty, I think we need to release poor Ben here onto the one-on-ones here. We're just about 10 minutes away from the witching hour here, but an important question, at least that I set great store by, Ben, and those are the letters of support. This is anonymous. Should these letters of support show more emphasis or validation of short-term commercial goal, or is it more appropriate for them to address long-term instead, or both?
That's a good question. I mean, I think in most cases, the way that we think about commercialization is to focus pretty narrowly on what's right next to your feet rather than what's out in the distance. It's good to have a discussion of like the final impact in 10 years of what your technology could be, to kind of do a satellite view of like how impactful it could be across the society and across the market. But in terms of letters of support and making your case in phase one, we would probably want to see something that's really about that first, maybe very narrow use case where your technology is just going to absolutely dominate the market because it's just so much better, and it's solving a problem that nobody else can even touch. And a letter from a person who represents a customer or user in that market would be a good example of a letter of support, although there's lots of ways to get strong letters. So I think it's probably more about the first 5-10 customers who you envision buying this in the near future than the $1 billion opportunity down the road. But you should, you can sometimes ask this question of a program director, and they might be able to give you a little bit of guidance post project pitch, I would suspect.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. An honor and a pleasure to have you. Extremely beyond informational, and by the myriad and volume of questions, apparently it was a good idea to have you join us. So
thank you for the opportunity.
No
These are great
surprise.
questions.
Thank you very much.
And you guys, I assume everyone on the web will be given my email address, so feel free to reach out.
We will indeed.
On the webinar. Yeah.
And
okay.
everyone, I promise you, we will get to all of your questions, and we will arrange to make connections with Ben. So we're not going to forget about you. And I finally